Running barefoot through freezing mud, Rosalind clutched a stolen silver coin. Marrying a nameless beggar was her only escape from a brutal, fated mate. But dawn broke, revealing her husband's face and his royal mark. She hadn't married a peasant. She had accidentally bound herself to Alpha King Alistair. The cellars of Oakhaven keep smelled of rotting turnips and damp earth. But to Rosalind, it was the only safe haven left in the world. She huddled behind a stack of oak barrels, her breath pluming in the freezing draft, desperately trying to mask her scent with crushed rosemary and dirt. It was a futile effort. Tomorrow was the mating moon, and the cruel biological reality of her werewolf lineage was already taking hold. Her fated mate had found her. In werewolf society, a fated bond was considered a sacred blessing from the moon goddess. For Rosalind, an Omega born to a disgraced minor bloodline, it was an absolute death sentence. Her fated mate was Gideon Smith, the future alpha of the brutal Ashwood pack. Gideon was a monster, masquerading as nobility. Only 3 days prior, Rosalind had witnessed him execute a young stable boy named Cedric, simply because the boy's terrified scent had offended him. Gideon had laughed while he broke Cedric's ribs, his golden eyes wide with sadistic glee. When Gideon had visited Oakhaven to negotiate trade, he had caught Rosalind's scent. She remembered the paralyzing terror when his large, heavy hand clamped around her throat in the corridor, lifting her off her feet. "You smell of rain and wild honey," he had whispered, inhaling deeply against her neck. "Mine! Tomorrow night, little Omega, I will break you in, properly." Rosalind knew what happened to Gideon's playthings. They were found weeks later in the woods, stripped of their minds and their lives. If she allowed the mating moon to rise and solidify their fated bond, her soul would be irrevocably tied to a sociopath. The bond would force her to crave him, to obey him, and ultimately, to die for him. There was only one loophole in the ancient, blood-soaked laws of Aethelgard, the law of Pravia Copula Prior Union. If an Omega was already legally and biologically claimed by another wolf before the fated mating scent settled during the mating moon, the fated bond would shatter. It was a severe taboo, often punishable by exile, but exile was a paradise compared to a life chained to Gideon Smith. Shivering, Rosalind pulled her late mother Lady Genevieve's heavy woolen cloak tighter around her shoulders. Hidden in her bodice was a leather pouch containing 30 silver pieces, her entire inheritance, stolen back from her cruel uncle, Lord Harrington, who had locked it away. It was enough to buy a stranger. She slipped out of the cellar, just as the midnight bells tolled, keeping to the deepest shadows of the cobblestone streets. The rain was sleet-heavy, biting into her cheeks, but she welcomed it. The downpour washed away her distinct Omega scent. She navigated the winding alleys of the lower district until she reached the Boar and Barrel, a notorious tavern frequented by mercenaries, rogues, and men who asked no questions. Pushing open the heavy oak door, Rosalind was hit by a wall of heat, stale ale, and the overwhelming musk of unwashed bodies. Tobias, the scarred innkeeper, shot her a suspicious glare, but she kept her hood low. Her eyes darted through the dim, smoke-filled room. She needed someone passing through, someone strong enough to survive a potential beating by Gideon's men, but desperate enough to take a meager sum for a fake marriage. In the farthest, darkest corner of the tavern sat a solitary figure. He was massive, his broad shoulders stretching the limits of a tattered, rain-soaked bearskin cloak. A hood obscured his features, but a thick, dark beard jawline was visible in the candlelight. He nursed a flagon of mead in silence, his presence radiating an unnatural, suffocating stillness. The boisterous patrons unconsciously gave his table a wide berth. Rosalind's heart hammered against her ribs. She approached him, her knees shaking. Up close, his scent hit her, not the rank smell of a vagrant, but something sharp and elemental. Snow-capped mountains, ozone before a lightning strike, and the metallic tang of old blood. "Sir," she whispered, her voice trembling. The figure didn't look up. "Leave." His voice was a low, gravelly rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. "I have money," Rosalind pressed, pulling the heavy leather pouch from her bodice and letting it thud onto the wooden table. The sound of silver clinking made the stranger pause. 30 silver pieces. "It's yours, all of it." Slowly, the man lifted his head. Beneath the hood, his eyes were shadowed, but she caught a glint of piercing, icy silver. "For what?" he demanded softly. Rosalind swallowed hard, tasting her own fear. "I need a husband. Tonight. Right now. We say the vows before the priest. You bite my shoulder to leave a claiming mark, and tomorrow morning, you take the silver and ride away. I will never look for you. You will never see me again." Silence stretched between them. The stranger tilted his head, inhaling slowly. Rosalind panicked, realizing he was tasting her scent beneath the rain and rosemary. He would smell the underlying sweetness of an omega in distress. "You are running from a fated bond," he stated, his tone devoid of judgment, merely an observation of fact. "My fated mate is a monster who will torture me until I beg for death," Rosalind said, her voice dropping to a fierce, tear-choked whisper. "Please, I am begging you. It takes 10 minutes. Save my life." The stranger stared at the pouch of silver, then back up at her hidden face. Slowly, a large, scarred hand reached out and pushed the silver back toward her. Rosalind's heart plummeted. He was refusing. But then, the man stood up. He towered over her, easily a foot taller, a mountain of muscle and dark fur. "Keep your silver, little Omega," he growled softly, stepping past her toward the tavern door. He paused, glancing over his massive shoulder. "Well, are you coming, or do you intend to marry the floorboards?" The rain had turned into a torrential storm by the time they reached the crumbling stone chapel on the edge of the village. Father Benedict, a blind, elderly badger shifter who owed Rosalind's late mother a life debt, stood waiting at the altar. His milky white eyes stared sightlessly ahead as the heavy chapel doors groaned open. "Rosalind," the old priest rasped, smelling her approach. Then, he stiffened, gripping his wooden cane as the Struniver's overwhelming presence filled the small, holy space. "By the goddess, who have you brought into my sanctuary?" "A willing groom, Father," Rosalind said quickly, stepping forward to light the altar candles. "Please, the sun will rise in a few hours. Gideon will realize I am missing from the keep. We must do this now." The stranger stepped into the dim candlelight, letting his heavy bearskin hood fall back. Rosalind finally saw his face. He was strikingly handsome, but in a brutal, rugged way. Sharp cheekbones, a strong, unyielding jaw, and thick raven hair plastered to his forehead by the rain. A jagged, faded scar cut through his left eyebrow. But it was his eyes that stole her breath, liquid silver, intense and ancient, glowing with a subdued, predatory fire. Father Benedict performed the rite of binding with trembling hands. In werewolf tradition, words were cheap, blood and teeth were law. "Do you, stranger, take this Omega under your protection, to shield her with your life, your blood, and your wolf?" Father Benedict asked. "I, Alistair, take her," the man replied, his deep voice echoing off the stone walls. Rosalind shivered. Alistair, a common enough name in the Northern Territories, yet the way he spoke it sounded like a royal decree. "And do you, Rosalind, offer your loyalty, your blood, and your wolf to this alpha?" "I do," she whispered. Father Benedict handed Alistair a rusted iron dagger. Without hesitating, Alistair sliced the palm of his hand, letting a drop of rich, dark blood fall into a silver chalice. Rosalind did the same. They drank the mingled blood, sealing the legal pact. "Now," Father Benedict said softly, stepping back. "The claim." Alistair turned to Rosalind. The air between them suddenly felt thick, crackling with an unseen static. Rosalind trembled as his large, calloused hands gently pushed the heavy cloak from her shoulders, exposing her pale, shivering neck. She braced herself for pain, expecting the rough utilitarian bite of a mercenary simply fulfilling a contract. Instead, Alistair's hands were incredibly gentle. He cradled her jaw, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. He leaned down, his breath hot against the juncture of her neck and shoulder. "Hold still, little bird," he murmured. "I will make it quick." His teeth pierced her skin. Rosalind gasped, her eyes flying open. It wasn't just a physical bite. The moment his fangs broke her skin, a massive, overwhelming surge of raw power crashed into her soul. It felt as though a lightning bolt had struck her heart. Her knees buckled, but Alistair caught her, hauling her flush against his solid chest. Fire raced through her veins, burning away the lingering, sickly sweet scent of Gideon Smith that had been haunting her senses. It was replaced entirely by the scent of pine, ozone, and dominating, absolute authority. The sheer intensity of the spiritual claiming was too much for an unbonded Omega. The world tilted, the candlelight blurred, and Rosalind's consciousness slipped away into the dark, cradled in the arms of her nameless stranger. She woke to the sound of rain gently tapping against a glass window and the smell of burning hearthwood. Rosalind blinked, her vision slowly clearing. She was lying in a large, relatively clean bed in a room she didn't recognize. A heavy, luxurious fur pelt covered her. Her shoulder throbbed with a dull, grounding ache. She reached up, her fingers brushing the raised, raw skin of a fresh mating mark. Panic immediately spiked in her chest. Gideon. Had he found her? Had the ritual failed? She sat up violently, clutching the fur pelt to her chest. "You're awake." The voice came from across the room. Rosalind whipped her head around, standing by the window, peering out into... He was shirtless, wiping down a massive, wicked-looking broadsword with an oiled rag. The breath evaporated from Rosalind's lungs. In the dim light of the tavern and the chapel, he had been covered by his heavy cloak. Now, bare to the waist, the truth was carved into his flesh. Spanning the entire width of his muscular, scarred back was an intricate, shimmering tattoo made of crushed gold and blue ink. It depicted a dire wolf with a crown of swords roaring at a crescent moon. Every pup in Ethelgard knew that crest. It was the sovereign mark. It could not be faked. The ink was bound with ancient blood magic that would burn the flesh of an impostor. Rosalind hadn't married a wandering mercenary. She had just bound her soul, her life, and her Omega nature to Alistair Penhaligon, the Alpha King of the Sovereign Pax, the most lethal, ruthless, and powerful werewolf in the known world. "You." Rosalind choked out, her entire body going numb. She scrambled backward until her spine hit the headboard. "You're the king. You're the Alpha King." Alistair turned around, his silver eyes locking onto hers. He set the sword down on a wooden table. He didn't look angry. He looked terrifyingly calm. "I am," Alistair said simply. He walked toward the bed, moving with the silent, lethal grace of an apex predator. He stopped at the edge of the mattress, looking down at her terrified, trembling form. "And you, Rosalind of Oakhaven, are legally my queen." "But why?" she whispered, tears of sheer panic welling in her eyes. "Why would you let me do this? Why didn't you tell me? You could have stopped me." "I came to Oakhaven incognito to hunt a traitor," Alistair said, his voice lowering into a dangerous rumble. "Gideon Smith has been smuggling silver weapons to rogue factions in the East. I intended to execute him quietly tonight. But when you approached me in that tavern, reeking of his faded scent, terrified out of your mind," Alistair reached out, his knuckles gently brushing the tears from her cheek. The touch sent a jolt of comforting warmth through the fresh bond they shared. "I decided a more poetic justice was required. He thought he could claim what is mine." Before Rosalind could process the possessive weight of his words, a thunderous crash shattered the morning quiet. The heavy wooden door of the inn room was kicked clean off its hinges, splintering inward. 3 massive, heavily armed beta wolves stormed into the room, swords drawn. Behind them, stepping over the ruined wood, was Gideon Smith. His golden eyes were bloodshot, his face twisted in a mask of absolute, unhinged fury. He had tracked her scent. "You filthy, treacherous little whore," Gideon roared, his gaze locking onto Rosalind huddled in the bed. He didn't even seem to notice the man standing beside her. "You thought you could bond yourself to some gutter trash to escape me? I will kill him slowly, and then I will flay you alive." Gideon lunged forward, raising his blade. Alistair didn't grab his sword. He didn't even shift his stance. He simply turned his head, locking his glowing silver eyes onto Gideon. Suddenly, the air in the room didn't just grow heavy. It completely collapsed. The raw, unfiltered aura of the Alpha King exploded outward, a crushing wave of supreme, undeniable dominance. The wooden floorboards cracked under the pressure. Gideon's 3 beta guards instantly collapsed to the floor, gasping for air, clutching their throats as their bodies were violently forced into submission by the king's sheer presence. Gideon stopped dead in his tracks, his sword dropping from his trembling hand. The sadistic arrogance vanished from his face, replaced by a sudden, horrifying realization as his eyes moved from Rosalind to the massive, heavily scarred man standing protectively over her. Gideon's gaze fell upon the golden wolf crest on Alistair's skin. "Hello, Gideon," Alistair whispered, a terrifying smile curving his lips. His silver eyes bled into a demonic, glowing crimson. "I believe you are looking at my wife." The silence that followed Alistair's declaration was absolute, broken only by the frantic, wet gasping of Gideon's elite beta guards choking on the floor. Gideon's face drained of color, his aristocratic features slackening into an expression of pure, unadulterated terror. The intoxicating, arrogant scent of the future Ashwood Alpha soured into the foul stench of panic. He dropped to his knees, not out of reverence, but because his legs could no longer support him against the crushing gravity of the king's aura. Your Majesty," Gideon stammered, his eyes darting frantically between Alistair's glowing crimson gaze and the sovereign mark on his chest. "I did not know. I swear by the moon, I did not know she was yours. She is my fated mate." "A misunderstanding. Do not insult my intelligence, Smith." Alistair's voice was a low, terrifying purr. He stepped over the splintered door, moving closer to the trembling Alpha. "I have spent the last 3 months tracking your little treasonous enterprise. Lord Arthur Hastings confessed everything before he died in my dungeons. The silver weapons, the funding of the rebel factions in the eastern valleys. You sought to destabilize my borders to declare Ashwood an independent state." Rosalind watched from the bed, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The man who had been her nightmare, the monster who had terrorized her and murdered innocents for sport, was now reduced to a whimpering child. And the man who had caused it was the stranger whose blood now sang in her veins. "The Omega is a liar!" Gideon suddenly shrieked, desperation snapping his fragile composure. "She seduced me! She orchestrated the smuggling routes. I was trying to apprehend her." Alistair didn't shout. He merely sighed, a sound of profound disappointment, pathetic. In a final suicidal bid for survival, Gideon's survival instincts overrode his logic. He didn't attack the Alpha King. He knew he couldn't win. Instead, his bones cracked and snapped in a grotesque, lightning-fast transformation. In a heartbeat, a massive, rabid russet wolf stood in the center of the room. With a savage snarl, the beast launched itself not at Alistair, but straight toward the bed. He aimed to kill the new queen, hoping the sudden shock of a severed mating bond would momentarily paralyze the king. "No!" Rosalind screamed, throwing her arms up to shield her face. But Alistair was faster than thought. He didn't even bother to fully shift. As the russet wolf soared through the air, Alistair intercepted him with a brutal, sickening impact. The king's arm extended, his hand morphing into a monstrous, black-furred claw. He caught Gideon by the throat mid-air, slamming the massive beast into the stone wall with enough force to crack the masonry. The sound of shattering bone echoed through the room. Gideon whimpered, blood bubbling from his jaws, suspended off the floor by Alistair's singular, unyielding grip. "You touch what is mine," Alistair whispered, his voice vibrating with the ancient, primal frequency of the first wolves. "You forfeit your existence." Alistair's claws closed completely. The russet wolf's body seized once, violently, before going entirely limp. He tossed the lifeless carcass to the floor like discarded trash. The Alpha King turned back to the room, pulling a rag from the table to wipe the blood from his hand. He looked down at the 3 beta guards, who were still pinned to the floor, wide-eyed and weeping in terror. "Take your master's body back to Ashwood," Alistair commanded, his voice returning to its calm, icy baseline. "Tell Alpha Smith that his son died a traitor to the crown. Tell him that if he wishes to protest my justice, he is welcome to ride to the capital and face me himself. Now, get out of my sight." The guards scrambled to their feet, dragging Gideon's massive corpse out into the rain without a single word of defiance. When the door was finally clear, the oppressive, terrifying aura in the room vanished. Alistair walked over to the wash basin, cleansing his hands. Rosalind sat frozen, the fur pelt clutched to her chin, her mind fracturing under the weight of the morning's events. Alistair turned to her, his silver eyes softening. He walked to the edge of the bed and slowly lowered himself to one knee, bringing himself down to her eye level. "Are you hurt?" he asked softly. "You killed him," she whispered, her voice hollow. "He's dead." "He was a dead man the moment he decided to commit treason," Alistair corrected gently. "But his death by my hand severed whatever false thread of a bond he claimed to have with you. You are safe, Rosalind. You have my word as your king, and my vow as your husband. Why didn't you tell me?" she demanded, a sudden flare of anger piercing through her shock. "You let me think you were a vagrant. You let me pay you." A smirk tugged at the corner of Alistair's mouth. "You offered me 30 silver pieces. It was a very generous dowry. Besides, if I had told you who I was, would you have spoken to me so freely? Would you have looked at me as a man, or just another monster in power?" Rosalind had no answer for that. She stared at him, taking in the rugged lines of his face, the regal bearing he could no longer hide. "Pack your things, little bird," Alistair said, standing up and reaching for his sword. "The capital awaits its new queen, and I believe we have an uncle of yours to visit." The royal palace of Valerius was a staggering architectural marvel of white marble, towering spires, and sweeping courtyards that gleamed under the high mountain sun. For Rosalind, who had spent her life hidden in the dusty, neglected wings of Oakhaven Keep, the capital was a terrifying, glittering new world. Her arrival sent shockwaves through the aristocracy. The Alpha King, who had rejected every high-born lady, duchess, and foreign princess for a decade, had returned from a covert hunting mission, bound to a disgraced, unranked Omega. The whispers in the gilded corridors were vicious. Lady Isabella Montgomery, a high-ranking socialite who had long vied for the king's bed, was particularly vocal, sneering at Rosalind's simple woolen travel cloaks, but Alistair silenced them all. He draped Rosalind in silks and jewels, seating her on the throne beside him. His silent, brooding presence was a constant shield. Anyone who dared look at her with disrespect found the king's silver eyes locked onto them, promising swift and violent ruin. A week after their arrival, Alistair convened the High Court. The Great Hall was packed with alphas, betas, and noble dignitaries from every corner of Ethelgard. Standing in the center of the room, looking pale and sweating profusely, was Rosalind's uncle, Lord Harrington. Alistair had summoned him. "Lord Harrington," Alistair's voice echoed off the vaulted ceilings, "you have served as the steward of Oakhaven since the untimely death of your sister, Lady Genevieve. Yet, I find your management lacking." "Majesty," Harrington bowed so low his nose nearly brushed the polished floor. "I have done my best with the meager resources of the East. The lands are poor." "The lands sit on the largest unmined deposit of moon silver in the continent," Alistair interrupted, his voice slicing through the hall like a blade. The court gasped. Moon silver was the most precious resource in the kingdom, capable of killing rogue beasts and forging legendary weapons. A deposit legally deeded to Lady Genevieve, and by birthright to her only daughter, Rosalind. Rosalind stiffened on her throne, staring at her uncle. She knew nothing of a silver mine. She had been raised in poverty, told her mother left them destitute. "You kept the deed hidden," Alistair continued, stepping down from the dais and slowly circling the terrified lord. "But that is merely theft. Your true crime is much worse. Bring her in." The heavy oak doors swung open. 2 royal guards dragged a shackled elderly woman into the hall. She was dressed in ragged robes, her eyes wild. The court erupted into murmurs. It was Madame Leona, a dark magic practitioner who had been banished to the northern wastes decades ago. "Tell them," Alistair commanded the witch. Leona cackled, pointing a gnarled finger at Lord Harrington. He paid me in gold to brew the blood mist draft. He wanted the girl out of the way so he could claim the mines permanently." "What draft?" Rosalind asked, her voice trembling but carrying across the silent hall. Leona looked at the new queen, her yellowed eyes glinting. "A potion to falsify the scent of the mating moon, sweet Omega. You were never fated to Gideon Smith. Your uncle knew Gideon was a sadist who would eventually kill you and leave no heir. He laced your food with the draft, tricking Gideon's wolf into believing you were his fated mate." The revelation struck Rosalind like a physical blow. The absolute horror, the terror, The desperate flight into the rain, it had all been a manufactured nightmare orchestrated by her own blood. Gideon hadn't been her fate. He had been her executioner in a plot for wealth. "Lies!" Harrington screamed, dropping to his knees. "She is a dark witch! You cannot trust her!" "I trust the ledgers my spies found hidden beneath your floorboards, detailing your payments to both Leona and Gideon," Alistair growled. He turned to the guards. "Strip Lord Harrington of his titles. Seize his assets. Throw him in the deepest cell in the dungeons. Let him rot in the dark he condemned his niece to." As her screaming uncle was dragged away, the court fell into a stunned, absolute silence. The nobles who had sneered at Rosalind now looked at her with wide, terrified eyes. She was no beggar. She was the wealthiest heiress in the kingdom, the rightful owner of the moon silver, and the queen of Ethelgard. Alistair walked back up the dais, extending his scarred hand to her. Rosalind took it, letting him pull her up to stand beside him. "There is one more thing," Alistair said softly, meant only for her ears, though the bond between them hummed with electricity. "What?" Rosalind whispered, looking up into his silver eyes. "When you bit my lip in the chapel," Alistair murmured, a genuine, breathtaking smile breaking across his harsh features, the bond that snapped into place. "It wasn't just the ritual of prior union. A fake bond wouldn't have grounded me the way you did. The moon goddess works in mysterious ways, little bird." Gideon's fake scent masked the truth. Rosalind's breath hitched. "You mean you ran into the storm to escape a monster?" Alistair whispered, leaning down to press a soft, fiercely possessive kiss to her forehead. "And you ran straight into the arms of your true mate." Rosalind looked out at the bowing court, the glittering hall, and finally at the Alpha King who held her hand. The mud, the rain, and the terror of Oakhaven were a lifetime away. She had wagered her life on 30 stolen silver pieces, and she had won the world. If you loved this story of betrayal, fated mates, and royal revenge, make sure to hit that like button right now. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss another epic fantasy romance. Share this video with your fellow werewolf romance fans, and let me know in the comments below. What was your favorite twist? See you next time.